So thank you so much for coming in here, staying and having a good conversation and making a connections. That is what we want to see in the symposium. And I'm glad that we have all of the beautiful faces. So now we are moving to the next important conversation. Will be moderated by Trevor, and he's the managing editor at the Global Atlanta. And Global Atlanta is also one of our close partners and supporting for the symposium. So thank you so much for everything and for the partnership. And I'm gonna hand it to you.
All right. Cool. Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Ethan. And thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm excited that we get the full complement of everybody in the same room right now. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself and what we're doing here as we go. But panelists, why don't y'all come up as I introduce you, and that way we'll save some time by taking the intros. So first, Daniel Stein, or should I say Stein? Stein would be the German way, so we'll use that. So Daniel Stein, who's a professor of North American Literary and Cultural Studies and Dean of the Faculty of the Arts and Humanities at the University of Siegen. And I'm going to do abbreviated introductions. I'm not going to read all of them. They're all getting to know each other here. So I guess to Daniel's right, we have Paulina Guzman. Paulina is the director of the Mayor's Office of International and Immigrant Affairs. Did I get the order right? Is it International and Immigrant? Okay, cool. And that's the City of Atlanta's International Affairs Office, which was combined a couple of years ago to handle immigrant affairs as well. She runs kind of the city's connections with the world. So we find ourselves reporting on Paulina's activities a lot. And then we've got, to her right, we've got Dr. Youngju Ryu. Dr. Ryu is the director of the Nam Center for Korean Studies at the University of Michigan, where she also directs the East Asia National Resource Center and the Big Ten Academic Alliance Korean Studies East School. So I want to learn more about that. That's going to be interesting. And lastly, but not least, a good friend of Global Atlanta here. I've had the pleasure of moderating lots of events with Jaap Verman. Jaap, also known as Jacob, also when he was posted in Mexico, known as Jacobo. So whatever you want to call him, you can just call him that. If you can say Jaap, then I would recommend that, but he'll go answer to Jacob as well. Jacob is the senior Dutch government, I would say, diplomat here in Atlanta, overseeing relations between the Netherlands and 5 southeastern U.S. states. So he's the Consul General of the Netherlands based here in Atlanta. Consulate opened in, was it 2019? I think so. We broke the story, so I should know that. But yes, so the Dutch consulate's very focused on economic diplomacy and educational ties between the U.S. and the Netherlands. And Jaap has an interesting academic history as well. He's got a master's in social economic history from Amsterdam University. Before he came to Atlanta, he was in the Philippines, running the, was it the Asian Development Bank, yes, Dutch relations with the Asian Development Bank. So thank y'all so much for being here. And I'm sort of I'm going to come around here so I can actually see you and still access my notes. But we're here to talk about leadership in global education. And I think we're probably preaching to the choir here a little bit. I mean, I think most people here understand the importance of global education. But just by way of introduction and getting y'all talking, why is it important? Why is it important that we're talking about this? Why are we here today? Why are we celebrating this? I mean, I think we're in a time of upheaval. We're in a time of questioning around why we should be engaging with the world in our educational institutions. And I wondered, since y'all are the experts in the field and in your respective fields, if y'all could give us your best pitch to start us off and get you going. Why don't we start with Daniel over there from Germany? Oh, and I'm going to give you a mic too. I'm going to be very generous. Actually hand you a mic. I'm told that y'all can have 2 to share them. So I never relinquish my microphone. So
hold on to it.
The first rule of moderation.
Is this working? Can you hear me? Yep. All right. Great. Yeah, you're asking why are we talking about this? I think if we're not talking about this, then it's not happening, right? I mean, we talk about the global as if it's simply out there. But if we're not engaged and if we're not kind of keeping it going, then we can't take it for granted. So I think it's very important on from the lowest to the highest level that we keep doing the work, that we keep meeting, that we keep connecting and networking, that we reach across borders, languages, and it takes effort. It's it's great fun. I'm also preaching
that's
to the
what I
choir,
always tell people.
But I
That's
think
why you should do it.
I think it's something you need to. It takes effort. It takes resources. We've heard about funding and always trying to get funding. That's always it's always a struggle. But that's why connecting is.
I think intentionality is important, right? And I was the beneficiary of this fellowship with Nuremberg, Germany, and what was amazing over that 2-week time frame was how everybody that was managing the program was there. A lot of them are still there, almost 15, 20 years later, and that's because they have a concerted government-funded effort to foster relations between cities and countries around the world. So, I think Germany has something to teach us on that, maybe, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Paulina, you worked with the World Affairs Council before. You've hosted 1 million delegations to Atlanta, and a lot of times emphasizing education. A lot of universities visiting, learning about Atlanta as a civil rights, human rights hub, as an economic dynamo. So why is it important to your job that we intentionally focus on education?
Sure. Well, obviously, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, I think now, and I think we're all feeling this, particularly in this room. I definitely think, we need to center our voice now a lot more. There needs to be a lot more global voices out there, just sharing their stories. Obviously, just when it comes to global education, in a variety of ways, it helps from an economic development perspective. It helps from just an interconnectedness perspective. It helps from, learning more about one another. And I think, definitely ensuring that we are promoting all of the great work that you all are doing is definitely an important aspect of our office as well. And I can talk a little bit more about a little bit later, but it's definitely a critical time now, I think, that we're facing to promote all the work and the importance and the impact of the global education space.
Yeah. Well, Doctor, you and I were talking about the auto industry just now before we came up. I don't know if you want to talk about the importance of international perspectives or cross-cultural engagement in U.S. competitiveness. We can get into that later on, but maybe your pitch on the importance of making sure these issues are front of mind first.
Yeah, so how much time do I have? Because it's something I feel quite passionate about and have a lot to say about at this particular juncture. And also, I think Trevor, when he circulated some questions for us prior to the meeting today, told us that we could answer these questions without being political necessarily, but I think I'm going to have to be.
I won't stop you.
I'm going to have to be. So if I could have a little bit more time than my co-panelists.
Well, this is a discussion, so we'll bring everybody back in.
Okay. So, I think the question was, why global education? What's the importance of global education? And maybe I can start with a more fundamental question, which is, what is education for? Not even before we get to the global part of it. And 2 recent pieces that I read in New York Times kind of made me think about that question at a very fundamental level. So one was David Shor's piece, a political data scientist and Democratic Party pollster, who really talked about the last election, presidential election, and the patterns of voting in terms of the educational or education polarization. Okay, there's been a lot of talk about race and gender, but it's really the big shibboleth was whether you had college education or not. And the more higher education one had, one tended to lean left. And if you didn't, you tended to lean right. So talking about this education polarization, I think it raises some really important questions. So, I mean, are the universities contributing, in some ways to making our society more stratified? And is that part of the, part of what we're dealing with? Long-term consequences of that? I mean, I think that's a central question we have to ask. And I think when President Trump says, okay, you can just have high school education, we're going to bring all the manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. It doesn't matter that a lot of our young people don't want factory jobs anymore. But you could have those jobs. He's rewriting education in terms of functional purpose that it can serve, and kind of the aspirational part of our educational mission, I think, is recasting as hypocritical or elite. No wonder he's going after all of those Ivy schools, because he's serving his constituencies very well with those moves. So, I mean, I think it's time for a gut check for those of us in higher education as well. But for me, the global part of it, the second piece then that I read, David Brooks' piece, he was talking about what made America great. In history of civilizations, the great nations were crossroads nations. Okay, so Amsterdam at one point.
You're teeing up the Dutch Consul General here.
Right, exactly. Right. And currently, we're really interested in building walls. But when we're thinking about diversity in terms of foreign versus native, which is a pattern we're engaged in now, I think we're moving in that direction. We have to really resist that. I think international has to be recast and freed from this attempt to make it a foreign versus native dichotomy. It's the function of universities to be aspirational. And to be aspirational means to be self-critical and to hold that space open for reflecting on ourselves. And we reflect on ourselves when we are able to occupy positions of others and see ourselves through the eyes of others. And we do that when we are a crossroads nation. We do that when we encounter other cultures, other languages, other people, other economies. And so I think these are all interconnected. And I think this is a very critical moment for all of those reasons.
Well, there's a lot there, and I'm going to come back to some of that. So one thing I do think is interesting, one of the reasons we like working with Georgia State in particular and AGSC in general is the efforts to reduce that stratification, particularly when you're talking about the gaps in study abroad, attainment, and those kinds of things. And I think Atlanta has a lot to say in that regard and is doing a lot to make sure that's more equitable, if we can still say that word. The other thing is competitiveness. Economic competitiveness has to do with our ability to serve the needs of workforce, right? And I will say there are a lot of jobs that don't need a university education, but there are also a lot of jobs that are technical in nature that could also benefit from international exposure. And we've seen some initiatives with regard to that happening in Atlanta, exchanges between technical colleges in, say, Germany or Korea or even probably the Netherlands as well. So we're teeing up our Consul General here to talk about why being a crossroads nation is so valuable and important. Jaap, tell us about how you kind of approach the educational piece of diplomacy here.
Well, you all think that's a diplomat, so he will give diplomatic answers.
He's the most undiplomatic diplomat you're going to meet. So.
Yes, wrong. So, thank God my government once in a while is also not so diplomatic. So we all believe in diversity, inclusivity, innovation, sustainability. We also believe in international cooperation, a global economy, free trade, and to the point of education, science, education, it just doesn't stop at the border. the Netherlands is one of the big hubs, the hub in Europe, one of the hubs worldwide, and why we are at a crossing point of what we do in trade, but also in knowledge and education. Most of our universities are top ranked in the top 100 worldwide is because of this international cooperation. And that's why I'm here, to support as a diplomat to bridge this cooperation with the universities here in the Southeast. And it's important that you mention also the technical colleges. 2 days ago, I was at Lanier Technical College with a Dutch company. And why? Because they are looking for cooperation with a technical college for labor force. They are developing programs because they have an ambition to grow. And by working with universities, technical colleges, they can work on focused programs so that this labor force, these engineers or other workers they need in their companies can be matched.
Yeah. All right. Okay, great. I thought you were going to keep going. So I'll come back to you.
You want me to talk more?
Well, I'll get you to talk about the royal visit and how that tied in with education as well. But we'll come back to that. So I guess going back to Daniel, your CV is really long. So I didn't read it all, obviously. But you've had lots of exchanges, different researchers, different institutions, different papers you've contributed to, different books you've worked on. I wonder if you could just talk about your personal history of international scholarly exchange and how that's played into your own development as a scholar.
Sure. I mean, Germany is interesting because the whole post-World War II political system and also society is very much influenced by kind of the Western world that's being kind of destroyed right now, if I want to get political, right? So Germany's always looked to the United States as like a strong transatlantic partnership. And when I studied at the University of Mainz, they had tons of partnerships with American universities that were started in the 1950s, supported by the American government as a way to make sure that something like the Nazi regime and the Holocaust would never happen again, right? So the idea of, instead of kind of punishing Germany for what had happened in those 12 years, the idea was we need partnerships, right? We need to bring people, across borders so that they understand each other, and cooperation is the best way, and collaboration, the best way against, against war and things like that. So to grow up in Germany, as I did in the 70s and 80s, was to be very much inundated in American culture, like on television, music. So I loved American music. We watched American film. I liked English as a language, so I thought, why not study English? And at the University of Mainz, they even had American studies as a subject. So that's also something that kind of emerged, where people said, we need this needs to be a field. This needs to be a study program. So I studied American studies. They had these exchange programs. I ended up going to a small town in Texas, of all places. Loved it there, small liberal arts college, lots of great people, kind of a year that changed my life. Came back, decided I wanted to get a master's, wanted to get a PhD. Spent 2 years at the University of Michigan as a kind of before I did my PhD. So I don't know, just the fact that, living in a different country is like living in a different reality, right? I mean, this transcontinental flight, it's a different time zone. The light is different. The food is different. The people are different. And to have the privilege to jump from one culture into another and then go back, it teaches you a lot about where you're coming from, but also kind of, learning the culture that you want to learn more about. That's a real privilege. And I think living, kind of having a foot in two or three, some people do this often, in different cultures, just gives you a comparative and perhaps a necessarily critical frame of mind, because you can see like what seems to be, inevitable in one, culture can be solved very differently in another one. And to be able to kind of switch back and forth and have a comparative frame of mind, read the news in different languages and to see how discourses work. I mean, all of that's very, very helpful. And also to maybe the last point, to at this critical moment when people in Europe are kind of shaking their heads at what's going on a federal level here, to know researchers in the United States, to have partnerships, to have friends, to kind of reach out and talk to these people and get their perspective, I think is very important. Otherwise, we're kind of shutting down. People are already saying, don't travel to the US, don't go to conferences, have to boycott all of this. And I'm thinking, then we're building walls again, right? And so that's not the way to go.
Well, I want to come back to Paulina about that in a minute, about subnational diplomacy. This is something we've talked about a lot. But I wanted to ask you one more thing, Daniel, on that. How do you feel like American studies as a discipline has changed over your time in that field? Because I feel like sometimes I studied Chinese in college, and everything you read about China is about geopolitics, right? And so, almost everything in the news has to do with what's going on with U.S.-China relations, particularly when you're here in the U.S. But there's not really much discussion about the culture underneath, and what bubbles up to the top. And so has it devolved, I guess, or evolved, whichever way you want to look at it, into a political thing, or are you still kind of holding ground on the cultural side?
I think it's becoming more political, especially since American studies in the United States is becoming very political, right? And so, but the big question in Europe is always, are we going the same route? Are we going to become almost activist? Are we becoming politically engaged, or are we just a discipline, and do we just study kind of American life and American culture? I think you can't avoid it. I study popular culture a lot. If you read superhero comics, you have to think about politics. You have to think about geopolitics. You have to think about Hydra as a fascist organization. I studied Captain America comic book series where January 6th plays a big role, right? And you read what fans write online. So all of these political discussions, they happen in the popular sphere as well, and they happen in literature as well. So you can't avoid being political, but of course we're always looking at what's happening here, kind of from an outsider perspective, which takes a lot of work because you need to study a lot. But on the other hand, it gives you perhaps a different perspective that can also be valuable, at least when you talk to each other.
Well, Dr. Yu, we were talking about the Korean investment kind of landscape here in Georgia and how it's been so transformative for the state. Yet I feel in some ways we don't really understand Korea very well culturally. So can you talk about a little bit about the Nam Center and the rationale behind it? And also, are we getting better about understanding Korea here, or do we still have a long way to go?
Yeah, so at University of Michigan, where I don't know if I'm proud to say it or ashamed to say it, but it's one of the birthplaces of area studies. Center for Japanese Studies was founded at University of Michigan in 1948. That's before the Korean War. And so many universities around the country have like Asia Center or East Asia Center. University of Michigan has separate China, Japan, Korea centers, partly because Japan was so ahead. And then China Center was created in 1960s. And then the Nam Center in 2010, actually, because, already East Asia had been broken into these country centers. And so the Korea Center had to be its own thing in order to simply exist. It came into being from pressure of students and the passion of a local real estate developer. And the Nam Center is named after this alumnus. So we are a relatively young center, but we have been very, very active. And that's just as well as it should be in some ways, because we mirror, I think, the explosion of interest in Korea here in the U.S. over the last.
To me, the irony is that we feel like we understand Korea because we have K-pop and we have all the pop culture references. But I feel like we maybe don't necessarily understand the politics or the geopolitics of Korea very well.
That's certainly true. I mean, I teach a class on the Korean War, and I also teach a class called From Truman to Trump, Introduction to U.S.-Korea Relations. But, I start the Korean War course by asking my students, how many of you know that the United States was actually the government of South Korea, the military government of South Korea for 3 years? And, none of my students know. But at the Washington, D.C., the Korean War Veterans Memorial, there's this moving message that says our nation honors her daughters and sons who gave up their lives to, go out there and save the country that they didn't know and people that they never met, right? And that's 1950. Yeah. So I asked my students, how can we be proud and think of it as an altruistic thing that we don't know and that we never met, a country that we were ruling just 2 years prior? So, it has to begin with a kind of, not just the fact that history is not known, but there are certain structures that make it imperative that we continue not to understand or not to know. So then we have to kind of think about what those structures are, and that's where we'll begin. I think I'll have a chance to talk about the popular culture a little bit later.
Yeah. Well, one of the things writing about business is interesting because you sort of get slapped in the face with this stuff. It's like if companies from these countries are spending billions of dollars here, you better know them, or you're not going to be, competitively engaged. And so sometimes we get pulled along, grudgingly or unwillingly, into being better citizens of the world by our own self-interest. But that's a really interesting dynamic that we've had to cover over the years. But Paulina, I wondered if you could talk about maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but what the mayor has been doing on the education front here in Atlanta. I know there's an international flavor to that. I remember I was with him in Ireland last year when Georgia Tech beat Florida State in a football game in Dublin.
We want Georgia Tech.
Yeah, and so, but obviously educational exchange, things like housing, those things are on his mind anywhere he goes in the world.
No, absolutely. So it's no secret that Mayor Andre Dickens values his young people here in Atlanta. He has said time and time again that every year of his administration is the year of the youth. It started off in 2023 as the year of the youth, and then in 2024 he said it's also the year of the youth this year as well, and now in 2025. So he's very much adamant about ensuring that our local stakeholders, our businesses, our nonprofit organizations, our universities are finding opportunities to help our young people thrive, both professionally and personally as well. And so when it comes to, at least within our office, just kind of going back to the global education piece and the community engagement piece, obviously we host a variety of different delegations throughout the year. On average, we host between 80 and 100 delegations a year. Last year, we hosted 89. And within the 89, there was also a variety of student delegations that come. And so we really love to invite these students to experience Atlanta, come to City Hall, provide them a presentation about, what makes Atlanta Atlanta. Last year, we also had the opportunity to host an exchange program between high school students from the city of Nuremberg. Nuremberg is Atlanta's sister city, and they had an exchange program with Benjamin E. Mays High School. Mm-hmm. And they were actually here in advance of the presidential elections. And so they really wanted an opportunity to explore what is sort of the state of affairs of presidential elections, democracy, voter engagement, what makes Atlanta a city, that continues to uphold its civil and human rights legacy. And so they had a really great experience. with the Benjamin E. Mays high school students that they were paired with. And then obviously they had a kind of like a takeaways presentation at the end. Their highlights obviously often, are like, oh yeah, I attended a Hawks game and like went to Chick-fil-A. That was really cool. And like, all these things. Yeah. Waffle House. What? 24-hour breakfast.
Talk about cross-cultural engagement, man.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And that's what's really fun about these types of exchanges is that they kind of get to experience, okay, what is real life in Atlanta? What is real life that a student gets to experience? And so I know that the mayor wants to find more of these types of experiences for our students, and we're trying to find different ways to do that. And we also try to support all of our higher education and K through 12 institutions as well, and providing these experience to the students that you all are supporting. We also have an internship program at our office. I think we have an intern here, Victoria, if you're still here. Yeah, hello, Victoria. She's from Mexico. She's been working with us. But yeah, so we hire a group of public service interns, social work interns, and then we also have high school interns from our Cristo Rey High School program that come and really work on a variety of different areas of our office, from diplomatic engagement to our Welcoming City initiatives, working on our language access program and our community engagement. We host different resource fairs across the city where they help with and interact with folks of different backgrounds, our foreign-born population. And we like to expose them to, what we do at the office too. We invite them when we have courtesy meetings with the mayor or with city officials. We invite them, to events, to our staff meetings. Like, how does a staff meeting, how does a staff meeting proceed? These types of things, and they're involved in our conversations too, because we really do value their input and their experiences. Going back to global education, what better way to advance the mission of our Year of the Youth initiative, but than to hear directly from the youth, particularly those that may have come from different backgrounds and experiences. So yes, it's a big focus for us.
Good. Well, I wanted to come back to Jaap real quick. I'm going to open it up. There are a lot of smarter people than me in this room, so I want to let y'all ask questions too. But Consul General Verman, can you tell us a bit about how education played a role in the King and Queen's visit last year? I know you signed some MOUs with different universities and whatnot, and that kind of underpinned everything, this knowledge-to-knowledge cooperation you've talked about.
Yes, what I think you have to know, well, the Dutch King and Queen were here last June for 2 days, and that was an economic visit. And for us, the Netherlands, economic diplomacy, economic cooperation goes hand in hand with also knowledge and education cooperation. So some background maybe about the Netherlands here in Georgia. We are in the top 5 of big investors here in the state. I think that we have almost 300 Dutch companies who do business here, with like 80 companies with a big presence in the state. And for Georgia, the Netherlands is the 4th largest export partner, the biggest export partner in Europe. So we have a good presence, and there was good reasons for the royal couple to visit Georgia. One day Atlanta, one day Savannah. And through the whole program, cooperation with, for example, Georgia Tech was important. We signed an MOU with Georgia Tech on infrastructure and logistics, what is one of the fields of excellence of the Netherlands. What is the challenge after a big visit like that is follow-up. How can you give follow-up? And that is what I always focus on. You organize an activity, big or small, but what happens afterwards? So, and I saw actually one of the students from Georgia Tech. What we did with Georgia Tech is that we organized a challenge with 16 students of Georgia Tech with 4 Dutch companies. Because what we believe is that in an early stage, you have to bring students in contact with the private sector. So they worked on specific challenges, I think from December until now. And in spring break, they went to the Netherlands, worked with the companies. Parallel, they got some insight about the Dutch ecosystem in business and in culture. They came back, and what I hope is that for now and in the future, they are enriched with another culture, but also for us, that they are Dutch ambassadors for the future. Another example is that we worked with here Georgia State. Part of the royal visit was hip-hop. We were looking for a specific topic, focus, what can we present from Atlanta in the Netherlands. And the big hit in the Netherlands of the whole visit was a visit of the royal couple to one of your hip-hop studios. Yeah, they were there, and it was the hit at every news agency. Yeah. And then, and look at me, like an almost 60-year-old guy, I'm diving into hip-hop. So, like less than a week after the visit, also with big support of Georgia State, we organized a hip-hop delegation from the Netherlands and one of the countries within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Curaçao, here to Atlanta. And we used and worked with the teachers, and we used the studios of Georgia State. And I'm in economic diplomacy for almost 30 years, but during this visit, business was made. So I'm now working on another follow-up of hip-hop, again to Atlanta, and we broadened this whole focus that we're now working on a multi-year program on music cooperation between the Netherlands and the United States. But also as a follow-up, we're now working with Georgia State on how we can connect the School of Music here with schools of music, conservatoria in the Netherlands. So that is another example. You cannot visit Atlanta without a focus and a lot of attention on human rights, MLK, Ebenezer Church. So that was also part of the visit. And one of also the outcomes of this royal visit was a project we started here with Georgia State on civil rights, youth displacement, and employment. And you will hear more about this project, I think, after this panel. So a lot of action and follow-up, and not only here, but also in Savannah. And then I stop talking. One of the other fields of excellence of the Netherlands is water management. So we started with Savannah State University, and they have an excellent marine science program and school, a cooperation on marine science. And also here, part of this program is that we connect students of that university to Dutch universities, but also private sector. A large Dutch company here in Georgia, they invite now students for internships at their company. And the next phase will be that we will organize internships for these students in the Netherlands. Again, to connect and to provide them with our culture, our business culture, but also to present them with an international economic outlook.
Great. Well, I was going to ask Dr. Ryu about whether Korea pioneered the cultural to economic diplomacy playbook. If you want to address that really quickly, anybody else, please raise your hand. I think we've got 5 minutes or something, so we got to make rapid lightning round after you answer this question.
Yeah, so K-pop and K-drama, I think The Guardian called it the K-boom. So certainly, I mean, that's the reason why all of a sudden, my classes on Korea at the University of Michigan enrolls like twice or 3 times as many students as they did before. I mean, all power to K-pop. I think K in that formulation is not necessarily Korea. It is Korea and it isn't Korea. And that, I think, is the feature that I, over time, have come to understand about what makes K-pop, K-drama so appealing, in the sense that it becomes platform for formation of new communities. And K, culture industry, does not insist on intellectual property. And it's very loose with copyrights, because it itself kind of took a lot of stuff from predecessors. And then it's interested, and it's okay, I think, in general, it's happy to be a platform, a conduit. So at the University of Michigan, for example, and I'm sure it's the case at Georgia State, Georgia Tech, Emory, there are like 5 student groups that are exclusively meeting to do K-pop cover dance. 5. And there's one that's Korean ethnic. The others are completely diverse. And there's even one group that's fully male, but they exclusively cover female girl group repertoire. So there's kind of a gender identification that's open, that's ethnic diversity, racial diversity. And I look at them and I say, well, this is Korean, what they're doing? No, I mean, it's really, K has become a way of creating a more inclusive space.
I like that. All right. Well, when y'all ask a question, make sure you ask a question. Make it relatively succinct if you can. And that way we can get more in a couple minutes.
Yes, hello. My name is Angela Daniel. I work for Clark Atlanta University's Office of International Program as a program coordinator. But I taught English as a foreign language teacher when in 2009. And I know during that era, it was a big push for English speaking Americans to come to Korea, to teach English. And so I didn't know anything about Korean culture, of any sort, didn't speak Korean, and at the time K-pop was not there. So, but what I did find is that, I learned so much from that experience, and that it still guides my journey, especially when I'm advising students. And anytime that I'm advising students and I tell them about that experience, they definitely resonate with that, and they're very much interested in Korea. And so do you feel that, them having that investment into education during that time period and now, do you think that has added to our understanding? Because now those that went abroad during that time period came back, and we're now sharing our stories. And so do you think that has advanced our comprehension of Korea? Because Korea has always, of course, with the war, they were closed off, for a certain period of time. And so with that, and it's definitely a homogeneous society. So now, there is a little more diversity there now than it was even 10 years or 15 years ago.
Next questions, maybe?
Why don't you go ahead and answer that? I got to walk over here, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a way of looking at that in a very negative way, which is that English was the language of power and there was cultural capital. And English became, within Korean domestic setting, a tool for stratification. There's no doubt about that. Having said that, any kind of, I think, and that's the beauty of exchange and international studies, any kind of encounter creates wonderful unintended side effects. And I think, for example, just the experience you discussed and the dividends that are continuing to pay. So, I mean, when I think about language, okay, I mean, one of the most depressing experiences of my life last year, as someone who has been translating from Korean literature for several decades, was ChatGPT. And seeing, totally, I mean, they do a very serviceable job in like fraction of the time that it would take me. If one takes a functionalist view of language, then you could just, but to take the opportunity to learn a language is to make oneself vulnerable and to be willing to be a child again as a full adult and to be willing to communicate with that other person on their own terms. I think that's an invaluable experience. That's the ethical core of language education that no amount of ChatGPT is going to replace. So I think that's probably what I would take away from your experience there.
Okay, we got one here, and I'm going to go up there, and I'm going to go there, and then there. Okay, and then that's probably as much as we have time for.
Growing up in the 60s and 70s, student activism around the globe was an inspiration. Today it looks a bit different, and maybe the establishment attitude towards student activism internationally is changing because whatever. What is your opinion on the role of encouraging students to be societal and political activists within international studies?
I think Daniel's going to take that one.
Okay, I don't know who you were addressing. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think at my university in Germany, our leadership is happy that there haven't been big protests. There's Israel, Gaza, and they're happy that there's no protests because protests are dangerous because there can be bad news for the university. I think that's exactly the wrong way to think about it, right? Universities should be spaces where this activism is kind of fostered, is informed by learning, by knowledge. So. But those are difficult questions right now, right? Because universities are risking a lot if they support activism. But if the students are the leaders of tomorrow, then of course they need to kind of resist. They need to question things fundamentally. They need to formulate, controversial questions. And going abroad, I think, is one way of kind of, coming back perhaps, or learning things about your own country where you think, I always used to take this for granted, but now I realize it doesn't have to be that way, right? So I think it can help foster this kind of activism. Angela Davis going to Germany, studying in Germany, then going back because she thought she needed to be activist back home. But bringing a lot of the Frankfurt School learning with her. So I think universities have an obligation in a way to kind of foster that learning.
I think we've got our panel for next year on topics.
I'm listening. I want to offer regarding your visit and the royal visit in hip hop. The state of Georgia just passed a bill to establish a Georgia music office. So as we think about our relationship with Georgia State and the city of Atlanta and Savannah, know that the state is taking a position on music. I'd like for you to know that as well. I have an interest in Africa, West Africa in particular. My project is global because we see Sankofa as coming to the South, to places of our first places of enslavement, and acknowledging the Southeast as that, and then all the way to our indigenous lands. And we hope to make those connections, even in this room and beyond. As we discuss international global studies, how are we being intentional about being inclusive in that work? And especially as we go into, say, the 120th anniversary of the 1906 Atlanta Race Massacre next year, and the same year we're hosting the World Cup. I'm thinking, where is our story? Those who are descendants, we're looking for our global footprint as well, and how can we we lift and elevate our stories, but also.
Another good panel topic.
Perhaps I'll answer just from a City of Atlanta perspective and what the mayor is working on when it comes to the City of Atlanta's engagement with Africa. So since the start of his administration, he has been very adamant about ensuring that Atlanta becomes a gateway to Africa. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think, first, obviously, is our connectivity. Hartsfield-Jackson Airport is the world's busiest airport, and we are grateful to have a variety of different direct flights to the continent, including Cape Town, South Africa, Johannesburg, Addis Ababa since the inaugural flight a couple of years ago, and Lagos, Nigeria as well. Yeah. Oh, okay. And just kind of talking about, there's a variety of different connections too that the city sees with the continent of Africa, the civil rights legacy, economic development connections, again, the global connectivity piece, but also sort of the cultural and the energy around this creative industries as well. So the mayor led a mission of 35 leaders across Atlanta, including elected officials, including business leaders, community leaders, restaurateurs, a variety of different folks. We went to South Africa for something called Atlanta Pambili, which really it translates to Zulu as forward. And part of the mayor's campaign is moving Atlanta forward. And so it absolutely connected there. But one of the focus areas of our mission was the promotion of this creative industries. And as a result of that, there is a conference that takes place in Cape Town every year called Fame Week. And they decided to designate Atlanta as their premier featured destination of the year. So historically, they have always done countries. They did Nigeria, Canada, the United States, and it was just, it was decided because of, again, these connections with Pambili, these connections, these historical and economic and cultural links with Atlanta, that they said, we need Atlanta here for 2025. And so it was a really great announcement. And I think just kind of thinking about how Atlanta is engaging in its bilateral and diplomatic relations and its economic development ventures, this kind of idea of music, hip hop, film, and entertainment is always central to how we're thinking about our engagement with the continent.
All right, I'm getting the hook, so we got time for one more, and make it quick question, quick response.
Well, thank you very much for this event, and I've been very blessed to hear what you're saying concerning what is going on. And I want to thank my sister there for highlighting Africa and resources in Africa and development of those resources, including human resources, natural resources in Africa. Now, we have to do that also intentionally if we're going to be a global leader. That's one. The other part, to me, talking about the culture and the shifting of the culture in this nation, and the fact that we are in the academia environment, we're being pushed to the left. We have to find our way to bring ourselves to the middle. What do we do to make that happen? Otherwise, we're going to be losing some people, no matter how much we want to educate them. What are we doing to bring ourselves to the middle so that we will reach the reachable? And even those who cannot make it to college, we are still informing the community and we are imparting the community. Those are my thoughts.
All right, anybody want to touch that one? Are we just going to let him end it here?
Well, actually, I was expecting somebody from Africa here this afternoon. That's what I think he was saying, but I'm not seeing one.
Well, there's some stuff going on after this panel, so stick around. Anybody want to address that, or else we can just kind of drop it here? Okay. Oh.
I can. I'm from a Dutch perspective. I can answer you. We have one of the black pages in our history was our colonial past and past in slavery. 2 years ago, the Dutch government apologized formally for our colonial and slavery past. The king and his family, who were also part of that past, also apologized. And the Dutch government more or less told the community, the Dutch community, also us as the diplomatic community, to work with local communities on social justice, social economic development, and cultural activities, connecting to that past, and more connecting also to the future. And that's what we are developing. If you look at me and you ask me, well, can you give an example of this? What you do is that we, with our countries within the kingdom, Sint Maarten, Curaçao, Aruba, are working, developing a program with one of your museums here in Atlanta, the Adama Museum. Have you ever heard of the museum? To see how we can set up a cultural exchange of artists on contemporary art between the countries and Atlanta. With, here, Atlanta Global Studies Center, we're in the middle of this project on civil rights, youth displacement, and employment, because I believe that economic development, education is where we can work with the less privileged of our communities on economic development with Savannah State University, and then I give the hand over to you. We also work on a cultural program between the countries in the Caribbean and Savannah State University, also focused on the African diaspora. So that's how we try to give content to this African link, and also try to honor and to look back at our past, our colonial history and slavery past, but with a focus on the future.
Great. Very quick, yeah.
So in response, the only thing I'll say is that in my experience, the left in the United States does not map cleanly and or evenly and or symmetrically onto the left in other countries around the world. And so it's in the negotiation there that I think we learn something.
Yeah, for sure. Well, y'all, I think it's always a good sign when you can't get to all the questions. I'm sorry for those of you who I couldn't get to. And after lunch, no less, we didn't all fall asleep. So please give our panelists who kept us wrapped in attention a round of applause.